What's the best SD card for 4K video? In this video, I'm going to break down the different types of SD cards and what all those numbers and symbols mean and which ones that really matter. At the end, I'll share a breakdown on how much record time you can expect to get from an SD card based on the amount of storage you buy and a few other things to consider before purchasing. First, let's talk about the type of SD cards you might see. This SDXC icon stands for Secure Data Extended Capacity, which means it uses an exFAT file system. In a nutshell, it means if you record a video clip that is 40 gigabytes in size, it's going to save it as one single 40 gigabyte video file or clip on the SD card. Another type of SD card is an SDHC memory card, which stands for Secured Data High Capacity. It caps its data at 4 gigabytes. So it only lets you record 4 gigabytes at a time, or it's going to split that 40 gigabyte video clip into a bunch of 4 gigabyte files. Most newer cameras will not let you even hit record on an SDHC card, and you might only be able to use it for photos. So just make sure that you go with an SDXC SD card if you want to be able to shoot video. The first thing that people look for when buying an SD card is the amount of storage or how much data that it can hold. Typically for 4K video, you'll want at least 64 gigs of storage, but cards also come in 128, 256 gigs, or even larger. Later in this video, I'll talk more about how much storage you might want to go with and how much record time each card will give you based on the size you decide to buy. So the 300 megabytes per second number on this card is the read speed. And this basically deals with how fast your computer is going to read or transfer that data off of the card. The faster the read speed, the quicker you can copy your files off your card to your computer. Your card reader and type of cable that you use to connect your card reader to your computer can also affect transfer speeds. The U with the 3 in it is the UHS class, and you'll also see some cards with a U1. A U1 has a sustained read speed of at least 10 megabytes per second, and a U3 is at least 30 megabytes per second. Another icon related to the UHS class is the Roman numerals 2. A UHS2 card also has 2 rows of pins on the back, while a UHS1 card will only have 1 row of pins. UHS2 cards have faster read and write speeds. However, if your camera or card reader only supports UHS1 cards, you can still use a UHS2 card, but it will just treat it like a UHS1 card. This 10 with the C around it is the speed class, which means this card can sustain a write speed of at least 10 megabytes per second, which is pretty standard in all cards these days. One important number to look at is this one with the V next to it, and this is the video speed class and has a lot to do with what codec, resolution, and frame rates you'll be able to record onto that card. You'll often see cards with a V30, V60, and V90 on it. This number has to deal with how many megabytes per second that card can write, 30, 60, or 90 megabytes per second. Generally, the higher the V class, the more expensive the card will be. In most cases, a V30 card will get the job done for 4K video. With my Sony cameras, I'm able to record XAVCS codecs at 4K video at 24, 30, and even 60 frames per second. I can also record HD video at 120 frames per second. Here's how to figure out which V speed class you'll need. On my Sony camera, I can select a frame rate, like 30 frames per second. And then in my record settings, you'll see a number next to it, like this 140M, 422 10-bit, or 100M or 60M. The M next to this number is in megabits, and video class speeds are in megabytes. 1 megabyte is equal to 8 megabits. To make this easier, just take the record setting number you want, for example, 140M 422 10-bit, and divide it by 8. So 140 divided by 8 equals 17.5 megabytes, which means a V30 card will work because that has a write speed of 30 megabytes per second. If I switched my record frame rate to 120 frames per second, and my record settings were now 280M for 10-bit, just take 280M and divide it by 8, which is 35 megabytes per second. So I would need at least a V60 card because it's 5 more megabytes per second than a V30 card. So when it comes to picking a video speed class, you just want to make sure that if you need to shoot 4K at high frame rates, you get a card with a fast enough write speed. When it comes to storage and how much record time you get, here is a table that I made that breaks down all the different frame rate options if you wanted to shoot 4:2 10-bit or 8-bit color on a Sony camera. On the right, we have the card storage sizes, and next to that, we have record times. So I typically shoot in 24 or 30 frames per second, and I only really switch over to 60 or 120 frames for shots that I know that I want to slow down when I'm editing later. I wouldn't recommend shooting everything in 60 and definitely not 120 frames per second. With that being said, we get around an hour or so of video with a 64 gigabyte card. And that pretty much doubles each time you upgrade to the next amount of storage on an SD card. I personally prefer to buy multiple cards with less storage compared to just one card with a lot of storage for a number of reasons. One is because I like to try and film my projects or recipes on separate cards so that I do not get them mixed up with each other, because this could lead to me accidentally not copying all of the files off of the card or organizing them correctly or losing it on my hard drive. Once I film a project or recipe on that one card, I will typically back that footage up on its own labeled project folder. Then I will format that card so that it is completely blank again before I move on to filming my next project. Two is because, again, I prefer to not do multiple projects at a time on a single card, and I don't need to worry about the card getting full and then having to grab another card to film the rest of the project. Because now I have a project that's split on 2 separate cards, and this could really throw you off when it comes time to backing up your files if you're not careful. And 3, that is another reason why I recommend having multiple cards. If for some reason you forget to format your card before filming on it, or you just filmed way too much footage and your card goes full, you can simply swap in another card to finish filming your project, compared to having to stop everything you're doing, take your card out of your camera, and back it up mid-shoot. This would be an absolute nightmare, especially if this happened right in the middle of you like searing a steak or cooking something and you only had one chance to get it on camera. With all that being said, I think it's good to go with at least 2 SD cards per camera that you own. And for cooking videos specifically, I think 128 gigabyte cards is more than enough storage for one recipe. I almost never film more than 64 gigs for a single recipe video, but there has been times where I filmed a lot of 120 frames per second shots during that shoot and I ran out of storage. So I go with 128 gigabyte V60 cards from now on. If you're shooting more than 128 gigs of footage in a single recipe, I think that you're probably shooting way too much footage, definitely more than you need. In another video, I'm going to talk about how I like to copy my footage from my SD cards and organize them on my hard drives. And if you're overshooting when filming, I'll have a whole other video on how to avoid that and how to shoot for the edit. That's it for this video, and I will catch you in the next video lesson.